Every once in a while, you're so mature and you're a dad and you're a real grown-up, Chris. And, you know, every once in a while we do need to remember that there is an 8-year-old who lives inside you.
Oh, you cannot imagine the number of jokes I have made about this segment. In the run-up to today and throughout the day, in the commercial break before the segment aired, it has been essentially nonstop.
I know, because I know there's an 8-year-old who lives inside you. Not the part of you that, like, drives and parents and runs your show and everything, but every once in a while, hi, little Chris, here he is. Well done, my friend. I'm not even going to make the obvious joke right now. Thank you, my friend. Much appreciated.
All right.
And thanks to your home for joining us this hour. All right. It was November 12th last year, November 12th, 2020. Election Day had been a week and a half earlier, November 3rd. And we all know how that resolved. November 3rd was Election Day. By November 7th, every major news outlet had called the presidential race for Joe Biden. President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris gave their acceptance speeches on that night of November 7th. So by November 12th, 5 days after that, the level of desperation among Republicans and Trump supporters who really did not want to believe that this had happened, it was kicking up a few notches every day. And by November 12th, things got publicly quite weird at almost a new level very quickly. Trump-supporting Republican Congressman Louis Gohmert of Texas on November 12th, he participated in something called a global prayer for U.S. election integrity. And where did that happen? Where else? Say it with me now. Obviously, that happened on Facebook, right? But on that Facebook broadcast, they sort of went one by one. They brought up to bat all their best stories, all their best fantasies about what had really happened that showed that Joe Biden hadn't really won, that showed how shadowy, nefarious forces had made it look like Biden won, but the real patriots were not fooled because they knew the real story. Because, hey, they heard it on Facebook. On that Facebook broadcast, November 12th, these guys tried out the theory first that there was a secret supercomputer called the Hammer, operated by the deep state. I think the idea was maybe operated by the NSA. I can never totally figure it out. Anyway, per their telling, the Hammer was a supercomputer that had the ability nationwide to switch all the real Trump votes into fake Biden votes. Shadowy forces, the deep state. The Trump-appointed head of cybersecurity at the Department of Homeland Security at the time had to put out a direct rebuttal to that craziness about the fake supercomputer. I remember seeing it at the time. And, you know, this thing actually from the real Homeland Security Department saying, no, there isn't a secret supercomputer called the Hammer that switches all the votes. I remember being mystified by what it was they were even rebutting. That's because clearly I don't have enough Facebook in my life or enough Louis Gohmert. The hosts of this November 12th Facebook event trotted out all these various conspiracy theories, purportedly explaining how it was that Trump had secretly won, but it looked like Biden won, but all would be soon remedied. They trotted out the Hammer thing. They trotted out what was by then regular fare for the Trump election conspiracies, this idea that a company called Dominion was somehow controlled by dead communists. Or are they really dead? How do you know? Should we dig them up? They went through the Hammer thing. They went through this whole thing about Dominion voting systems. And, okay, maybe if it wasn't the Hammer, it was dead communist control from beyond the grave of Dominion voting systems. They went through all these things one by one. This was the time, right? Total nonsense. But after they went through those two, the Hammer supercomputer one and the Dominion voting system secretly controlled by Hugo Chavez, who's dead, right? You know, once you're through those two and you sort of haven't got what you need to kick it up a notch. And why settle for just continuing to spin everybody up into a frenzy based on your own unsourced assertions when you can source your assertions to a sitting member of the United States Congress who is going to come on your program on Facebook and tell everybody a whole news story that's even better? And that incidentally justifies even more radical direct action to try to keep Trump in the White House. So Texas Congressman Louis Gohmert, this event November 12th, he comes on and he was like, I see your made up NSA's supercomputer fantasy. I call your shadowy communist-controlled voting system software, but I raise you, I have a new one. I raise you a U.S. Army commando raid in Germany that is going to fix all of this, even though in my story, the Army are the bad guys.
I had information from some of our former intel people that there was extremely compelling evidence that could be gleaned from Scytl, that's SCYTL. That's a company headquartered in Barcelona, Spain, that was responsible for aggregating all the information from all the machines and whatnot. That information as to how many votes were switched from Republican for Democrat would have been easily established from the information that Scytl gathered, and what were the votes going in and which ones were changed going out. It turns out I don't know the truth. I know that there was a German tweet in German saying that on Monday, U.S. Army forces went into Scytl and grabbed their server. There's some that believe this is the U.S. intelligence that manipulated all this in order to cover their own rear ends.
The U.S. Army goes to Germany and seizes the server from a Spanish company. Because this is the server the Spanish company in Germany had used to switch in America all the votes from Republican to Democrat. It was the record of the whole thing. And the Army, let's see if I follow this. Army got the got the Spanish server out of Germany. That was the server that somehow fixed the election to make it look like Biden won when really Trump won. And now the U.S. Army has the server. And that's good news, right? No, that's bad news, because the Army is also the bad guy here because Intel is covering their butts. What? That was the theory from Congressman Louis Gohmert on November 12th. The Military Times actually did a great job documenting how this particular Trump world conspiracy theory continued to evolve over the course of the next couple of weeks in November, so that by December, it wasn't just the Army going in to seize the server from this company. Instead, the server was being guarded at a CIA facility. The CIA was protecting it, and there was a firefight. And on the other side of the firefight was a U.S. military intelligence battalion working for Trump lawyer Sidney Powell. She was like their commanding officer, maybe. And that battalion, the 305th Military Intelligence Battalion, which is in real life a real thing, in this conspiracy theory was commanded by Sidney Powell, the lady in the leopard print cardigan, and they went to Germany and physically fought it out, a shooting war with the CIA to get the servers that would reveal all about how the election was stolen. And somehow in the continued evolution of this story in November of 2020, the U.S. Army soldiers, under the command of Trump lawyer Sidney Powell, they were somehow elevated to special operations forces. And then the final, as far as I can tell, the final iteration of it was that in this firefight where it was Sidney Powell's Army commandos versus the CIA, multiple Sidney Powell commanded special operations commandos were killed in this operation. At least 5 of them were killed. And it was all covered up. And their bodies were disappeared. Because what was on the server? Well, Trump world found out. Turns out on the Trump server, the server from Germany, it was the real election results as seen on this map obtained by dude on Twitter. And as you can see in this map, Donald Trump secretly won the election with more than 400 electoral votes, including the electoral votes from California, which in reality is a state that Trump lost by nearly 30 points. But the secret server in Germany tells a different story. Of all the Trump world conspiracy theories after the election, this one about the German servers and the military thing was definitely the most baroque and maybe the most insane. And here's a sitting member of Congress, Congressman Louis Gohmert, promoting this, of course, on Facebook, also on a conservative TV channel called Newsmax. It was also featured on One America News. That network even broadcast a picture of the map that was supposedly found on the servers that were seized in the raid. A map that showed the real election results where Trump, among other things, won California. The company that got hit with this conspiracy theory, the company that was supposedly at the heart of this conspiracy theory, they had to put out a statement. That must have struck them as insane to even have to write. They're like, yeah, number one, we don't actually tabulate votes in U.S. elections at all. Number two, we don't have any offices or any servers or anything else in Frankfurt, Germany. Number three, no one has seized anything from us, let alone the U.S. military. What else are we supposed to say here? This is insane. But, I mean, think about the implications of what they were promoting here. And they were widely promoting this particular conspiracy about the election. The Trump world contention here, advanced by sitting members of Congress included, was that Trump supporters, prayers for election integrity, which was the name of that Facebook event, November 12th. The contention here was that their prayers for election integrity, their fight to make sure that Trump's election was somehow secured and not stolen and allowed to be, misrepresented by shadowy forces, they were being told by this insane Baroque conspiracy theory that what they believed about Trump secretly winning the election is something for which blood had already been shed. Something for which American soldiers had already been killed in a shooting war as they tried to get the evidence to grab the server that would show that Trump had really won the election, right? What Trump supporters were being told when they were being shoveled this junk was that there was a military operation underway already to keep Trump in the White House, to reveal the truth about the stolen election. It's a military operation already. Members of the U.S. military already dead in the service of this battle for truth. Is maybe already the start of a war. I mean, you wonder why they were spun up enough to do what they did on January 6th, right? They had been told by all of these voices of authority in Trump world that the war was on, that blood was already flowing, that patriots had already given their lives to stop the steal, to prove that Biden hadn't really won the election. They were primed to use force with nonsense like this by being told you won't be the first. Other patriots have already died for this. And that's the really serious part of it, as ridiculous as it is. The ridiculous part of it is still just as ridiculous, right? One of the guys who promoted this both dangerous and completely ridiculous idea of this secret raid to steal the servers back from the CIA facility in Germany, one of the guys who promoted this concept specifically online is someone who runs a company that is called Cyber Ninjas. This is the Cyber Ninjas website. Oh boy, here we go. Yeah, that's their homepage. Just rest your eyes there for a second. Ninja costume, red alert. If you scroll down off that landing page, this is the next thing that you get to. Do you have a cyber ninja on your side? I don't know, but if I do, I hope he's not wearing gigantic baggy leather gloves while he's trying to type on my Mac laptop while it's turned off. This company, Cyber Ninjas, a company run by an online proponent of the QAnon conspiracy theory and an online proponent of the fantasy that there was a secret war between the army and the CIA in Germany where the secret servers that stole the election for Biden were seized and everybody died and it's all been covered up and we can't find their bodies because the deep state is doing it. But we have the map that shows the server. Online proponent of that conspiracy theory runs this company, Cyber Ninjas, which has now just been hired. They're now doing this. They have just been hired by the people of the state of Arizona via the Republican-controlled Arizona Senate. They are being paid with taxpayer dollars in Arizona to recount all the 2020 presidential election ballots in the largest county in Arizona. In Arizona, a majority of voters live in just one county, Maricopa County, where Phoenix is. In November, Maricopa County, and indeed Arizona as a whole, voted for Joe Biden for president. And as much as Trump supporters may not like that, it's true. There's already been an audit by a federally accredited firm of the vote in Maricopa County, a forensic audit of the vote. There was a hand recount in Maricopa County overseen by both political parties. The Board of Supervisors in Maricopa County, which has 5 members, 4 of which are Republicans, they voted unanimously to certify that Joe Biden won the election. But not anymore. Now, in late April, the cyber ninja guy from the secret server in Germany, secret commando raid, war conspiracy thing, Arizona Republicans sued to allow his company, him and his company, to have another look at what happened in Arizona back in November. And they have actually turned over all of the real ballots, more than 2 million ballots cast in Maricopa County. So the Trump conspiracy theory guy, the QAnon secret server war guy, can see what he thinks happened, so he can give the real result from the Arizona election. This is really happening. I should mention the Cyber Ninjas guy is going to be working alongside another stellar choice by Arizona Republicans, a Republican former state representative from Arizona who personally went to D.C. on January 6th for the festivities there because he said that he was a Trump elector from Arizona. Now, Trump didn't win Arizona, so the electors from Arizona were actually the Biden ones. But on the day that Congress was certifying the election results and tallying up the Electoral College votes, this guy went to D.C. as an Arizona Trump elector, because he contended that Arizona's Trump electors should be counted, because Trump should be awarded the state's votes in the Electoral College. So he was there that day. The count, you may recall, was delayed that day by the mob attack on the Capitol, which temporarily stopped the counting, but he was there in person. So Arizona would have its electoral votes counted for Trump. He was there January 6th. And he's also now announced that he will be working on this recount of Arizona votes that started today, organized by the Arizona Republican State Senate. Him and the Cyber Ninjas guy who promotes the secret server in Germany story. And you know, Joe Biden is president of the United States. Whatever they do in Arizona is not going to make him not president of the United States. But what they are doing in Arizona, what has Trump world like electrified right now, all newly energized with the fantasy that Trump will, as yet, be reinstated as president and Biden will be exposed as a usurper or whatever. I mean, what they just started today at the Veterans Memorial Coliseum in Phoenix is going to be used by Trump world to try to claim forever that Trump secretly won Arizona, and he secretly won the election, and Biden is illegitimate as a president. And they will use what they are starting here to contend that for years. Here we go. Do you have a cyber ninja on your side? We are never going to get away from this mess. I mean, eventually we'll all get old enough that it'll age out, but we are just never going to get this particular dollop of stink off of our proverbial shoe. Today, honestly, felt like a minefield of stories like this. I mean, hardcore Trump world really does think that the election is going to be overturned because of the, Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood, QAnon folks being put in charge of recounting all the ballots in Maricopa. And that really did start this week. And they really are going to recount those ballots, and who knows what they're going to say happened there. I'm sure we'll get it in a Q drop when it happens. Or Louis Gohmert will tell us about it on Facebook. I mean, they're going for it. That's what Trump world is. And of course, Trump world is still essentially in control in the Republican Party. But today felt like a minefield in terms of stories like that. These things left behind that we are still mired in as a country, that we sort of can't escape the stink of as a country, even as the country is trying to take off in a different direction now. For example, today at the United States Supreme Court, the court, in its infinite wisdom, assigned to Justice Brett Kavanaugh the task of writing the majority opinion in a sweeping new ruling that essentially reinstates sentences of life without parole for kids. There was no outright rule banning that sentence, banning life without parole for juvenile offenders before, but there was strong, settled Supreme Court precedent making that sentence only available in very, very narrow circumstances for people convicted of crimes that occurred while they were children. Justice Kavanaugh's opinion today blows up all that precedent, which is one thing on its own terms, right? Life in prison without the possibility of parole for something someone did while they were a child. Without the possibility of parole for life. You do something when you're a kid, you get locked up for it, and there is no chance, no matter what else happens in your life, in your entire adult life, for you to ever, ever see the unincarcerated light of day for what you did when you were a kid. I mean, that just on its substance, that is ethically, spiritually, something I'm not sure the country was looking to shovel onto our collective conscience right now. You may disagree. But to have it be Justice Kavanaugh who writes that opinion for the court, all this hand-wringing, right, especially from conservatives about the perceived authority of the court, the propriety of the court, the esteem in which the court is held, to have Justice Kavanaugh write this particular opinion on how there's no such thing as bad behavior by a kid, no such thing as bad behavior by a teenager that can be at least partly explained by that kid being a kid? Him? After his confirmation process that he turned into a theater of his own rage at being questioned about allegations made against him for his alleged behavior while he was a teenager. Here's Brett Kavanaugh, now a Supreme Court justice, insisting that it doesn't matter if you're a teenager, our society can and will now declare you irredeemable for the duration of your natural life based on things you are found to have done when you were a child. You're concerned about the perceived legitimacy of the court? Really? No other justice could have written that one? All three Trump-appointed Supreme Court justices, because there are three of them, voted with Justice Brett Kavanaugh on this. And it is Trump-appointed justices that made the difference here. The justice that Brett Kavanaugh replaced, Anthony Kennedy, had in fact led the court on pushing rehabilitation and mercy to the fore when it came to kids in trouble. That is done now with the Trump justices there, led by Justice I Like Beer. Today in the House, we had a rollicking hearing on why it is that U.S. taxpayers still pay tens of billions of dollars in subsidies to oil and gas companies. It's one thing for them to compete on their own terms in the marketplace, but what is it about oil and gas companies in particular that need literally tens of billions of dollars in taxpayer funds propping them up? That hearing today had lots of fireworks. And it was underway as the New York Times broke this big story of how the military junta that has just taken over in Myanmar, the new military dictatorship there that is busy killing its civilians by the hundreds, the primary source of income for that military junta in Myanmar, at least until recently, has been a single oil field. An oil field in which California-based Chevron is a major partner. Military dictatorship that has just taken over in Myanmar appears to be largely funded by this one oil field that Chevron is a part of. Now, the military dictatorship in Myanmar doesn't have its own lobbyist in Washington right now. But new lobbying disclosure forms from Chevron, just disclosed this week, show that Chevron as a company, again, Chevron based in California, has taken it upon themselves to become the lobbyist in Washington against the U.S. government putting any sanctions on the Myanmar military dictatorship. Any sanctions that might, of course, take a big bite out of their big gas field there, which again is the same gas field that is the revenue source funding the dictatorship that has just taken over that country. Happy Earth Day, right? I mean, Democrats today in Congress convening this hearing, doing this legislative work, arguing that the U.S. should maybe stop giving tens of billions of dollars in taxpayer money to gigantic oil and gas companies every year, since A, they don't need it, and B, why are we paying for that? And by the way, have you seen how they are behaving around the world? I mean, big oil and gas gets taxpayer subsidies. Any taxpayer, U.S. taxpayer funds, making it into this Chevron lobbying budget that's trying to keep the spigot open for the murderous military junta that just took over Burma? because Chevron's worried about anybody taking a bite out of their gas field there? I mean, are we seriously paying for that? The Biden administration is trying to sanction the military dictatorship there to try to turn things around in Burma. Meanwhile, they're taking U.S. taxpayer dollars, giving them to Chevron, which is lobbying to make sure that there aren't any sanctions that hurt them in Burma, even though sanctions that hurt them would be the sanctions that would actually defund the murderous dictatorship. I mean, why would we pay for that? Why would we pay on both sides of that? The Republican witness at that hearing today, as I mentioned, this idea of stop subsidizing oil and gas companies. That's in the Biden administration's legislative proposals. It's in Democratic legislative proposals. That's what the Democrats are trying to do. That's why they convened this hearing today. But the Republicans, of course, got to also bring their own witnesses. They summoned as their witness for today's hearing, a representative from the American petroleum industry who argued for the Republican side that we as a country absolutely should keep subsidizing big oil and gas companies. One of the Republicans on the committee, a Republican congresswoman from New Mexico, then expressed her own, in its own way, eloquent agreement with that. Because if we didn't keep subsidizing oil and gas companies as a country, I mean, come on, man. Seriously, what would happen to pantyhose?
In fact, if not for fossil fuels, we wouldn't even be having the capability to have these remote calls and talks right now because of the plastics and medical devices, eyeglasses, pantyhose.
Pantyhose. If we don't keep giving billions of dollars to Chevron and Exxon and all the rest, you guys, we might lose pantyhose. Pantyhose. Are you ready for that? That was the Republican contribution today on the issue of why you shouldn't just pay oil and gas companies when you put gas in your car. You should also have your government give them your tax dollars too, because pantyhose and other stuff. What a day, right? President Biden hosted 40 heads of state today for a climate summit. He made really big new commitments in terms of what the United States is going to do to cut our emissions and get back to leading on this issue. The president's top advisor on climate change is Gina McCarthy, who is in this interesting new role under President Biden after having spent the Obama administration running the EPA. Gina McCarthy made some big announcements today along with Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Gina McCarthy is going to join us here live. Next.
Not about a planet, it's about people. It's about our future, our kids. It's an unwavering focus on the air that we breathe and our public health, the strength of how we can build our communities and make sure we are grabbing environmental justice as we move forward. It's what we value, it's what we care about, and we have to deliver it.
We have to deliver it. That's the White House National Climate Advisor, Gina McCarthy. You may recognize her from her time as EPA administrator during the Obama administration. But here she is today in this new role that she now holds in the Biden administration. She spoke today in Washington alongside Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. They both appeared at a new electric vehicle charging station that took questions from reporters about the administration's plan to more than quadruple the number of public electric vehicle charging stations that we have in the U.S. The idea is to try to transition the fleet, to try to transition U.S. cars from gas-burning cars in the U.S. to electric cars. You need charging stations everywhere in order to make that viable. Today, President Biden pledged to cut emissions of greenhouse gases in the U.S. by half by the end of this decade, by about 8.5 years from now. That is a huge, new, ambitious goal. Gina McCarthy is the person tasked within the administration with coordinating all the effort necessary to get there. Joining us now is White House National Climate Advisor Gina McCarthy. Ms. McCarthy, it's really nice to see you again. Thank you so much for making time to be here.
It's nice to see you too, Rachel, and happy Earth Day.
Thank you very much. People have referred to you in the press as climate coordinator, climate czar. I've seen you called the Fauci of climate. Part of the reason I think people are having a hard time settling on a title is because your role is new and amorphous. I knew what to call you when you were EPA administrator. What is the role that you have now? How do you define it?
Well, I'm just advising the president, plus I'm running a little group of folks that are looking across every sector to look at how we can start reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, because President Biden has rejoined the Paris Accord, and we are really going all out to reduce our emissions as a way to really restart the economy, as a way to grab the future for the United States. We're going to start investing in America again and bring back some really good paying union jobs and start looking at that clean energy future and how we win it for our country. So it's an exciting moment, and we're doing a whole of government approach. Every cabinet member's involved, and obviously Secretary Buttigieg is really interested in the transition of the transportation sector. But, you know, I'm hanging out with Jennifer Granholm at DOE. I'm hanging out with Deb Haaland, Secretary Haaland at DOI. I'm hanging out with Tom Vilsack at Agriculture. I'm hanging out with Michael Regan at EPA. I mean, every one of these cabinet agencies really have a lot to offer about how we reduce our emissions, but equally importantly, how we just rejuvenate ourselves as a country and start investing in the kind of future we want to hand our kids.
How much of that big goal announced by the president this week, this idea of cutting our national carbon emissions in half by the end of this decade, how much toward that goal do we get by the infrastructure bill? I know the infrastructure bill is a big priority for the administration, and I know the legislative effort to pass that is well underway. I believe that some version of the infrastructure bill ultimately will pass thanks to the budget reconciliation process, even if Republicans don't come along. But how much is that overall goal dependent on that one bill?
Well, I think President Biden was really interested in moving that bill regardless of what our commitment was, because he saw it as being so vitally important for our economy and for, you know, the health and well-being of the American people. So it will be enormously helpful in accelerating this. But if you look at already available climate solutions, if you look at the ways that we can move our country forward and reduce our emissions, we still will be able to get at 50% reduction by 2030 because clean energy is winning everywhere. You know, I know the prior administration kind of liked coal and wanted to favor it, but it had no impact. We had the biggest actual boost in solar and wind power the last year of the Trump administration, and the Republicans in that administration actually extended tax credits to keep them humming along. And that's because states and cities wanted it. It's cheaper. So there's lots of opportunity, but investing in innovation is going to be important. So the American Jobs Plan is a great strategy to actually move forward to grab that clean energy future. But on its way, it brings the best opportunity and hope that we have really to grow good jobs, to reinvigorate our unions, to get the middle class where they need to be again, to move people out of poverty, and really very importantly, Rachel, for the president and I think for all of us, is to invest in those environmental justice communities that have been hammered by this pandemic because they don't have good housing, they can't get around on transit anymore, they are struggling to get food on the table. We have to understand that now's not the time to keep sitting around at everybody's kitchen table and talk about climate. But if you want to sit around that kitchen table and talk about clean energy jobs, if you want to sit around and talk about good agriculture practices, if you want to sit around and talk about really neat ways of getting around, like better transit and making sure our potholes get filled, they like that discussion. And that's how President Biden thinks of it. He doesn't think of this as climate. He thinks of, when you say climate, he thinks of jobs. And I think that's pretty great.
White House National Climate Advisor Gina McCarthy with a sprawling portfolio and a lot of the skills, the Washington earned skills that will, if anybody can do it, you'll be the one to get it done. Thank you for being here tonight to help us understand. Come back anytime. We'd love to have you back.
Thanks, Rachel.
All right. We've got much more ahead here tonight. Senator Cory Booker is going to be joining us live in just a moment. We've got lots more to get to. Stay with us.
We've gone from all of these abuses, from Oscar Grant and Amadou Diallo and others, all the way to Philando Castile right here in Minneapolis area. We struggled through all of that, but we are going to now, in his name, in the name of Dante, we're going to pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act as federal law. We are going to make it against the law all over this country to keep bringing us to funerals for our young princes. Some of us are told to shut up and just be quiet. And you call that peace, but peace is the presence of justice. You can't tell us to shut up and suffer. We must speak up when there is an injustice.
Reverend Al Sharpton giving eulogy today at the funeral for 20-year-old Dante Wright, who was killed in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, during a traffic stop 2 weekends ago. Police officer involved in that traffic stop shouted, we could see on body cam footage, that she would tase young Mr. Wright. Instead, she shot him once in the chest with her service weapon. The protests in Brooklyn Center since that killing have been a dramatic backdrop to the George Floyd murder trial that took place just a few miles away. In order to avoid more funerals like Mr. Wright's and Mr. Floyd's, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act needs to become federal law. That bill is before the evenly divided U.S. Senate right now. And perhaps alone among any other major piece of legislation, we do know, miracle of all miracles, that there are at least some bipartisan negotiations happening to try to pass this. CNN reported earlier today that Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass planned to meet with Democratic Senator Cory Booker and Republican Senator Tim Scott today for, quote, informal discussions about the bill. Huffington Post seeming to confirm that a little later on today when their reporter in the Capitol reported that he saw Republican Senator Tim Scott, Democratic Senator Cory Booker, and Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass walking out of an elevator together. As I said, miracle of all miracles. Joining us now is the Democratic senator from that very unusual tableau, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey. He's a member of the Judiciary Committee. Senator Booker, it's really nice to see you. Thank you for making time tonight.
It's good to see you too, Rachel. Thank you for having me.
It feels like a very small miracle to be able to report with eyewitnesses that there are bipartisan discussions happening among three bicameral, bipartisan, very serious members of Congress like you and Senator Scott and Congresswoman Bass. That alone feels like a glimmer of hope that I'm not used to feeling. Is it worth being hopeful about this?
It definitely is. I'll confirm that we've been talking literally for weeks, and those bicameral, bipartisan discussions have been really promising. We all have our lines. In other words, there's things that are critical for me to see in this bill, and we can't get it done in the Senate unless we have Republican support. And Tim Scott has been a good faith, honest broker in these discussions. So I'm very hopeful. But look, we are in the context, and it was very real over these weeks to see death after death of African Americans at the hands of police, and on top of that, the George Floyd trial. So I think that the sense of urgency is there to get real accountability in policing, to ban certain practices with police, to get more data available, to empower more oversight. So there's a lot of good discussions going on, and I think a sense that America needs something to get done. It will not solve all these issues, but it will be, hopefully, if we can get it done, it'll be a meaningful set of reforms that give us more strides towards justice.
Senator Scott is a Republican in the Senate who has received a lot of support from his own party. There's reports now that they're going to put him forward, for example, to give the Republican response to the speech that we don't call the State of the Union when President Biden gives his first speech to a joint session of Congress next week. Is it clear to you that Senator Scott is essentially negotiating with you and talking with you about this, not just on his own behalf, but that if he gets to a place where he's comfortable, that he could vote for some sort of policing reform legislation that you all work out together, that he will be bringing other Republican senators along with him?
Tim is very wise in this. I don't think he's trying to do something where he's going to stand alone. He's trying to bring along his caucus, and that's the challenge, is for us to come to agreements that are worthwhile. But again, I think he's negotiating in good faith, and he is keeping his caucus informed, and has the sort of auspices of his the Republican leader. So we are in a place now where I think all of us feel optimistic, but there's still some tough issues to negotiate out.
Is there anything that right now you can tell us is a no-go place for you in terms of what must be part of this, or it's not worth passing it? Do you have bright lines like that in mind in terms of what's the minimum that has to be here in order to make this worth pursuing?
I don't want to get into details to negotiate this out in public, but I'll say this. Look, I watch a funeral like the one you showed with Al Sharpton, and I think what really hurts me is I've seen it before and before and before. I'm sitting in a community where the number of young black boys we put in boxes, it anguishes me to think about it. And so this legislation for me has to take strides towards saving black lives, to ensuring that we can stop some of the things that killed Eric Garner, like the chokeholds, or killed Breonna Taylor, like an unjust, in my opinion, no-knock warrant. We have to do something that maybe doesn't solve all the problems, I'm sure it won't, but that can give us a sense that this replay we've been seeing over and over, the wretched anguish, the pain, the scarring of our communities, the moral injustices that we all can agree on that should not happen. We have got to do something meaningful that makes that less likely in our country.
Senator Cory Booker, the former mayor of the great city of Newark, New Jersey, now Democratic U.S. Senator from New Jersey and a member of the Judiciary Committee. Senator, it is always great to see you. Thank you for being here, particularly on this topic tonight.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you.
Good luck. All right, we got more ahead. Stay with us.